You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Adler and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and tonight this is almost the final episode of our Road to Ahsoka series. But tonight we're going to tackle a character we all know and love, someone who finally made their live performance, not live performance, but their on-screen performance in Season 3 of Rebels. And, of course, we're talking about Thrawn, one of the most... Oh, man, there's so many words, and I don't want to spoil anything because we're going to get into what Thrawn is, who he is to us, some of the words that we use to describe him, but certainly a character that has made an impact in Star Wars and will continue to make an impact in Star Wars, as it's looking to be the case with the Ahsoka series. And speaking of making big impacts, this guy every week makes a big impact in the show. And of course, I'm talking about Jonesy. Jonesy, welcome to the show. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, this is going to be a great show. This and the Patreon show later tonight is going to be a lot of fun too, as we explore the rest of the Rebels crew. But I mean, yeah, how can you, there's so much excitement around Thrawn. I mean, everything from the Heir to the Empire series originally, but all of the Zahn books since. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, then we get him on screen with Rebels. It's just a fantastic character. To bring him live action is going to be really exciting. Well, I'm really interested to see what they do with this character live action and how it will differ. And maybe we'll speculate on some of the things we might see tonight.
Yeah, let's do that. Hey, other things that make an impact are the people that are with us tonight on the show and our Patreon members. Who are those folks?
Yeah, huge thanks to all of our Patreon members. And actually, Steve C., thank you for the huge upgrade. He went from the now part of the tribe up to our Delusions of Grandeur member tier. So thank you. That's a really big deal. We really do appreciate that. And a huge thanks to all of our now part of the tribe members: Rob, Mike, Lauren, Dante, Risk, Justin, Jackson, Sharkman, Dan, Daz, Isabella, Uncle Leon, Josh C., Jacob, and Reader Reborn. There was a name missing because now the Delusions of Grandeur members include Rod, CJ, Alex, and Steve C.
Wow. Thank you.
I have to start putting initials at the end of the name because we have some common names. But yeah, thanks to all of our Patreon members. If you're curious about Patreon, we'd love for you to go check it out. CantinaCast.com/Patreon. We will have Zeb and Chopper later tonight at 10 p.m. Central once we're done with Thrawn. We would love for you to go over there and grab that video. It's right at the top of the link. Of course, if you are an audio-only listener, no problem. We got you covered there. In a couple of days, we'll get that out to you on the audio side. If you are listening to us, we'd love to invite you to come out to the live stream. CantinaCast.com/YouTube is where you can find us. We usually do this on Sundays and Thursdays. We'll see what the Ahsoka series does that. They threw us a couple curveballs, so we're figuring out how the timing will work with this, with our schedules and everything else. But usually Sundays and Thursdays at 9 p.m. you'll find us live. And if you're enjoying the content, we'd love it we see all the folks in the background. So if you're not subscribed, please do consider subscribing to the channel. Like the channel. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you'd like to hear more of, less of. We are trying to feature some of those comments, so we certainly do appreciate that. In our chat so far, we've got Sky, Alexandra, Jack, Music Train, Steph, and 80s Kid from the 90s, and a number of people in the background as well. So please, we invite you to come out. And of course, programming notes, this coming Wednesday, since now Ahsoka premieres on Tuesday nights, Wednesday night, at least for this 2-episode premiere, we will bring you our 2-episode breakdown on Wednesday. What is this? Wednesday, August 23rd at 9 p.m. We'll start that. And then we're planning on having Lauren joining us. So you will get all three of our perspectives there. So we hope you'll come out and join us.
Yeah. So a lot coming up. And don't forget, we have the big event, which is tomorrow. We've got that 2-hour character dissection on AP5. And I have been working all day on those show notes. So if you're a huge AP5 fan, as most of us really are, let's just be honest, please tune into that show. Wait, hold on. I'm just getting word.
No. This is what it really needs to be, Albert.
Okay, go ahead.
You're giving people a hard time, but really what it is, it needs to be you singing AP5 song.
For 2 hours.
So I can, even if for 5 minutes. But that way I have a compliment to Mike Rondo's Chewie and the Porgs of the holiday season.
Yeah.
I can also have your rendition of AP5 in Rebels.
And in all seriousness, and we're not doing an AP5 character dissection, although we probably should. I mean, we said we were going to do all the Rebels, and technically he squeezed in there at the end of definitely by season 4. So hey, just quickly, I want to come back to what we were talking about, what you'd mentioned with the time change, because I just want to touch on that very quickly, because it's it's kind of a game changer in a lot of ways. And I don't know how much of this was spurred on by the fact that we've got if anything, the writers and actors strike. Was it did they somewhere have an epiphany? Have they been looking at data?
Does it just make sense, Albert?
Does it just make sense? That's exactly what I was going to say. As an American, I think it makes complete sense because now we're not the ones staying up to 2 a.m. in the morning to watch these episodes. And I think the folks in England had it kind of easy because for them it was 6 p.m. or 6 a.m. in the morning, so they'd wake up and get a show or whatever. So yeah, it just feels like we're not the ones that are having to stay up late. And no offense to anybody that I know we've got a lot of international listeners. I just love the fact that we're going to be able to technically watch an episode of Star Wars on television at 8 p.m. our time Central here in where you and I are both at. And, I think it's going to change some stuff. I think we're going to see people doing live immediate reaction shows, 9, 10 p.m., a couple hours after that. Wednesdays seems like it's going to be the day that a lot of podcasts and YouTube channels are going to start releasing their content. So I think this is a good thing. I actually like it. I don't know if the Tuesday time slot really makes a difference one way or the other. Why a Tuesday versus a Thursday or a Friday for that matter? I don't know. But I guess your initial thoughts on the time change and why?
The why, I'm not really sure, but I know the benefits of it. I mean, clearly, I really like this. I think this is a great move because I think, like you said, you're back in prime time, right? You're back in that prime time slot where you watch your show, and when it's one of the last things you see before you go to bed. When you go to work the next day, and a lot of people are going back in the office. Wednesdays is one of my days back in the office. What do you want people to be doing first thing in the morning when they go get their coffee? First thing in the morning, and people get around, you want to say, "Hey, did you go watch Ahsoka?"
Yeah.
Right. And I think whether that's a response to the strikes going on or if it's, I don't know, it just makes more sense, to where you just say, I want that initial buzz. Am I losing anything by bumping it up a few hours? I don't think you're losing anything. They did this with Obi-Wan Kenobi when we were out at Celebration, right? And
yeah,
I think it was just fine. If anything, for us at the convention, of course, which isn't apples to apples, but, I thought it worked out really well. You got that buzz and that excitement. You had an all-day thing the next day rather than people seeing it sporadically. Oh, did you see it? Oh, don't tell me about spoilers, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And then you're having to wait more or less until the end of the day, Wednesday or even Thursday, to get a lot of that response and get a lot of that dialogue and that conversation. So I think this is a really great thing. I think this is something that does not hurt the show in any kind of way. I'm sure there's data-driven metrics and everything behind the scenes of it, but I'm curious if this just, hey, let's try it. Let's see what happens. Let's go back to a prime time slot. Let's move streaming into prime time viewing, right? And that kind of shift. So
yeah,
I'm all for it. Let's try some things. I mean, this is what streaming is supposed to be. We're supposed to be really flexible here. They've got complete control of what they're going to do. So give it a shot. Let's see what happens for 8 episodes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like now going in Wednesday morning and you say, hey, did you catch Ahsoka last night? People don't look at you like, are you crazy? It's only been 4 hours, right? When I was watching them at 2 a.m. and asking people that day, they're like, you've already seen it? I'm like, yeah, I went to bed at 3:30, 4 o'clock after I was done on Twitter. Rest in peace. But yeah, you're maybe not as crazy sounding these days. Stop it. These days, given that more people may catch it on that first evening. So all good stuff. I'm happy about it. I'm excited about it. And like Jemsy mentioned or alluded to earlier, we're still kind of working through when. I think as of right now, we're probably going to stick to a Thursday kind of breakdown. We may have Wednesday in our back pocket, just if there's something like we've got to get it out and talk about it, then we'll kind of come back to you guys. But we're probably going to stick to the Thursday for now. So
yeah, and a couple, just go to the chat real fast. So Hard Counter saying, I've never stayed up until 2 a.m. to watch an episode. Nope, not ever, not me. Sigh. Yeah, we've all been there for certain episodes in particular. Music Train, and I'm happy to not have to watch it at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Yeah, leave us a comment.
Keaton.
Yeah, leave us a comment too. Let us know what y'all think. For the folks in the live stream, thank y'all for doing that. But anyone else, please let us know what you're thinking about this. Is this good for you? Is this bad for you? Do you care? Are you excited to go to work and start talking about Star Wars?
Yeah, Keaton chimed in and said, I love the new time. So, all right. Well, let's talk about the Thrawn, or Raw, as his real name is, I guess.
Thrawn Euroto.
Yeah. I've never listened to the audiobook, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. Yeah. And I know in the audiobooks, it was before then, I was not even close, but that's his real name. Maybe we'll get into that here in a little bit, but let's kind of start where we've been kind of talking about here recently, or how we've been doing a lot of these episodes, and just what is it that comes to mind when you think of a character like Thrawn? And we've already alluded to some of this stuff, and it's okay. Let's rehash some of the things that we've already discussed in some of the previous episodes that have come up about Thrawn. But I guess some of the words and some of the things that you would use to describe Thrawn, what comes to mind for you?
man, calculating. I mean, just a guy that you always feel like is a step ahead, 3 steps ahead, and just completely has always got everything under control, right? He's got a plan for everything. I think perceptive is another one, especially when you look at his appreciation for art. Well, appreciation might be a bit of a strong word, but his interpretation, his ability to use that to an advantage, and it's something very unique about the character. I just love that it's a part of who he is, and it's just so different, even within the Chiss ascendancy, right? He is a complete anomaly and an outsider in that regard too. And I think outsider is another term I would use because he's an outsider with his own people, and he's certainly an outsider with the Empire and the rest of the galaxy, and kind of the core Star Wars galaxy that we're used to. So it's just a character that doesn't fit anywhere, but yet somehow fits so well with what Emperor Palpatine would want to accomplish, and have someone at his at his disposal in order to carry forward any kind of plan that he has. So I think this is a character that is just so unique in so many different ways. And I think that Lars Mikkelsen bringing him to life on the Rebel series and now live action just gave us a whole nother dynamic to the character that we read in the books. And someone in the chat earlier was talking about how the character is so different between the Legends materials and the more recent Thrawn novels by Timothy Zahn. And I think they're absolutely right. I mean, it is 100% a very different character. I like the character actually so much more now than what we originally had with the Legends character. Actually, the Legends character feels so foreign to me, and quite honestly, just doesn't feel accurate anymore, right? Even though I think the thing to remember about Thrawn though is that he is cold, and he can be very cruel, even though he will give you kind of a warrior's death in some ways in that respect. But I've kind of rambled on enough. What are the things that come to mind for you first thing when you hear the name Thrawn?
Yeah, let me go. I'm going to go to the comments real quick. So Music Train just chimed in, said Master Tactician. He's the one also said earlier, he said, I'm currently about 1/4 of the way through Dark Force Rising. It's my 5th Thrawn book. I did Thrawn, Alliances, Treason, and Error in that order. Pretty wild how different the lore is in the old books. And that for sure. And we're going to touch on that a little bit, just kind of a maybe programming note for this show. I was trying to come up with, do we talk about Legends first? Then do we talk about canon? Do we kind of blend them? I think where I landed is we're just going to kind of talk about the characteristics and call out some of the differences between the two as we go through this. So, my apologies up front too. Like some of this stuff is so, some of this I've known forever, and then when canon came in, and then the new books, it's all kind of blended together. So if I misspeak on something, somebody call me out, please, because it's been a while, especially for the Legends stuff. As well. Stephanie also chimed in. She said, it's definitely appreciation for art, not just understanding. He believes in keeping and preserving culture art as well. That's something I think we saw front and center during the Rebels episode. You could see him. He's got artifacts in the background. His office is adorned with different pieces of art. He had stuff on the walls, murals, all kinds of things. And I would agree too. It is, I think he does have an appreciation, but it's almost like a cipher for him. He uses that to get in the heads, understand his enemies. And that would even go so far as to say not just his enemies, but anyone really. He understands the importance, the cultural importance, and the importance of understanding cultures, and he uses that to his advantage, which gives him a big step up than most other people. Going back to your question, or I guess the question at hand right now about what words we use to describe him, I would agree with what Music Train was saying. Brilliant tactician, strategist as first and foremost. He's a scholar. There's there's a leadership aspect of him as well that I don't think gets discussed enough, and hopefully we can kind of fold that into the conversation. Yeah,
because it's really stressed more in the books than it is in Rebels on the screen. I think it's really stressed in Zahn's books.
And he's got more and you're right, and it's probably because we get lots of examples in the books of where people make mistakes, and especially in that Error series and some of the other ones a little bit later, you almost kind of expect the Thrawn, or I guess the Imperial officer, a Grand Admiral, to take the position of somebody like Vader or Palpatine and, off with their head, right? Immediately slam them down, kill them, do whatever they do, make them an example. And that's not at all what Thrawn does. Thrawn is very much okay with people owning their mistakes, right? And so long as they're improving and they're not deviating from the mission at hand or their loyalty in any way, they're rewarded. And it's such a fresh perspective coming from the Empire. And I want to go back to what you said also about Palpatine, because he's such a unique character in we have nobody like him in the Empire at all, for a lot of different reasons, not just the way he leads and how he's not punitive in the way he goes down on people or goes against people if they, break the law or they don't do what he's been asked to do or they make mistakes. But also even his, he's an alien, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. But you're talking about a xenophobic group of people in the Empire who have allowed, at least Palpatine has allowed this person to rise up in order, and not without some disadvantages. Like we'll get into that too. Like there hasn't been a rosy street here for him that he's paved in order to get to the top. It's been pretty rocky, and he's had a lot of pushback along the way. But I think it is big of Palpatine to acknowledge that this is a very unique person. And don't get me wrong, Palpatine's doing this for his own selfish reasons at the end of the day anyways. Right. But that's kind of the cool thing about Thrawn too. Like when you think about, we're going to talk about where his loyalty lies. And when you really pull everything back at the core of it all, he is first and foremost loyal to the Chiss and to his race, right? So they're almost kind of playing the same game, just coming at it from different angles.
Yeah, but I do like the stark contrast between like a Tarkin and a Thrawn. And I think that's so important to be able to distinguish between that, because we do just see the ruthless cruelty that Tarkin has, especially when he just executes people for failure. There's never anything really good enough. There's no reward. There's no even congratulations in a lot of ways. And while Thrawn is very succinct with some of those messages, he gets his point across both in a positive way and in a disciplinary way, if you want, or an educational way, whichever way that he feels is most beneficial. But once you exhaust those options and you prove that you are incapable or incompetent, mostly I think with him, you will suffer his wrath on some of that too, especially if you are against what his objectives are. And we've seen this with the rebels in particular, where he will go and he will order people to their deaths, right? And sometimes to kill themselves effectively, like we saw in Rebels when they were actually riding the faulty equipment. He knew what was going to happen, but he also wanted to send that message. So you get both of that, though. He can be like Tarkin, but I think he's just a far more effective version of Tarkin. And so when you're in the Emperor, you've got both of those tools in your utility belt. You can accomplish many things with both of those, with those two people, with the ways that they approach these types of problems and situations.
Yeah, he's got such a liberty there to be able to dispatch one of them depending on how he wants to drive it or how he wants to make a change. He can go one way or the other with these, and that's a huge benefit for Palpatine.
And they're both absolutely loyal. I mean, that's the one thing. And I know we'll talk about like you just kind of alluded to, but yeah, he is very loyal to the Emperor. I don't think there's any question about that for the most part.
No, and I would agree too. And don't get me wrong, it's more about the reason why the loyalty, right? Like, why is it that he's doing what he's doing, and why does he have such loyalty? It's more complex than, I just love Palpatine. It's not that simple. Like Jack said here in the comments, he said multifaceted, talking about Thrawn. Music Train chimed in again, said calculated, and Lego Cat 3000 said always a step ahead. And so yeah, calculating, definitely thinking ahead a few times. And I want to come back. We'll come back there in a little bit too, but I want to kind of shift just quickly over to a lot has been said about him and comparing him to Sherlock Holmes. I think it's a really good analogy, because if you think about the character of Sherlock, and to be honest, I'm not the biggest Sherlock Holmes. I'm not a buff. I don't read the books. I've seen the movies. I get the gist of who he is, what he does, but he goes about solving problems. Thrawn, very similar to Sherlock Holmes. He takes in everything around him, right? The surroundings all around him. And going so far as, like we said, to the culture, understanding behaviors, seeing patterns, being able to pick up on that stuff, and all that plays into his critical thinking and before he makes a decision. If we want to take that analogy further, the one thing I always loved about the books, and we've not seen this so far at all, really, in the animated, and I don't know that we'll see it in the Ahsoka series, but if we have a Sherlock Holmes, then the Watson would have to be somebody like Gilad Paleon, who, for the audience, when you're reading the books, Paleon is always the character that, goes around scratching his head like, I don't know, why don't you tell me? And then Thrawn goes in and explains exactly what he's doing, why he's doing.
In Heir of the Empire, that was the case.
Well, that was the case, yeah.
Not anymore. He's got his own, yeah.
Yeah, so, but I do like the analogy. Like, I think it's a very strong analogy, and it's just I don't know if, I never really looked into whether or not Timothy Zahn had that intention, but it does play well. I love the fact that we've got a character like this in Star Wars, and it just happens to be on the Empire side, and it brings a level of competency that I think the Empire is sorely missing. They've always, we always think about the admirals and, he's as clumsy as he is stupid, right? To quote Vader, and just the bumbling morons that they have in these high positions of power, which, let's be honest, the reason they're there is because they keep offing them out. So, it's a pretty quick ladder in the Empire, but you got somebody like Thrawn who brings a level of competency that is, it's just unquestioned in terms of what he's done here in the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so we talked about the words to describe him. The one I want to touch on another quick aspect, and it's kind of a slightly related to some of the things we've already discussed about, but this idea that, victory and defeat. The victory and defeat meaning there are many times in the novels, and I don't know that we've actually seen this in the animated series. This might be one of the deviances from the canon versus legends, but Thrawn was always willing to just go ahead and take a loss. You know what I mean?
Oh, it happened in Rebels several times, yeah.
Yeah, so he's willing to take the loss because he knows that through the loss, he will gain some knowledge to win further down the road. So there wasn't necessarily always an ego thing with him. He was always thinking long-term, playing the long game, thinking about the bigger picture here, and allowing, and in some of the cases too, he would allow in these skirmishes and these battles, he would allow the enemy to make a small gain or a small win so he could see how they would react or how they would go about that. And then you turn that around on them, down the road a little bit later. So all of this so that whole, victory and defeat is uncharacteristic of a lot of the Empire, really. Because if you think about Palpatine, just the nature of the Sith and the dark side, it is all about power, aggression, overpowering your foes, throwing mass numbers of things at people, which is what Palpatine would do, whether it was droids or clones. You know what I mean? We just overpower them by sheer numbers. He took a very, very different approach in the way he, went to combat. So going back to that whole masterful tactician, so this is part of that, one aspect of that.
Yeah, Thrawn actually fits, if you think about how Palpatine rose to power, it fits them very closely with wanting to, having to lurk in the shadows, do everything in secret, biding your time, being patient, setting people up to fail at the end of the day, right? Using their advantages against them. And see, we have a lot of that in Thrawn. I think we have that both in the books and in the series. I think where the books give a little bit more of it, always 3 steps ahead. You can't, while he's learning, he's not taking the losses, I think, in order to, for the learning aspect of it, where in Rebels, he really did a lot of that. And I think some of that's also to help keep the show moving a little bit more because you don't have all of the exposition, you don't have all of the bouncing between the different perspectives like you do in a book, right? So just general opportunity, I think, in some of that space. But I like that it is very synonymous with how Palpatine likes to work. I think he really does fit the mold with Palpatine very well. Palpatine, again, will use whatever tools he has at his disposal, whether it's throwing a mass army and overwhelming because that's just what he has, and he's not paying people to think too much, or he pays just a few people to think in order to keep all of those other people kind of in line to be able to do what they want to do, and they're subservient in that way because, for whatever reason, whether they're afraid or they don't have any better options, or this is the best thing that has ever happened to them because of how crappy things were under the Republic or whatever. So yeah, I think it's just but his record though, I think is a little mixed if he came from the Rebel series because you see him take a lot of losses, but we've talked about this too. Some of these things were no fault of his own. How do you expect and predict the Bendu, right? How do you anticipate Purrgil coming out of space and a force-wielding Jedi devilry to go in there and, and get everything to whisk you away to some unknown destination through hyperspace with a whale? I mean, there's something that you take the loss because you don't have any other way of going about it. But again, his sheer determination is also still there. His ability to learn and adapt, I think, is also very synonymous with the strengths of this character as well.
Yep. I guess on that same note, I guess examples going to Legends now too. He did take a loss. Well, I wouldn't say he took a loss, but so I'm going to jump into Outbound Flight, and I don't mean to do this just yet because I think we're probably going to talk about this a little bit later. And we'll get into the explanation of exactly what Outbound Flight is, but that was his first encounter with Jedi. So in Legends, the Chiss had no idea or concept of the Force. They had never really had anything like that. It's totally different in canon. We'll come back to that here in just a little bit, right? But that was his first encounter during that book, The Outbound Flight. It was his first encounter with Jedi, and so he was not used to Force sensitives. And so there's a moment in there where Jar Sabayoth, of course, was part of that crew in the outbound flight and nearly got, I think he almost killed him with the Force at some point. I think he Force choked him or he did something to him. I can't remember now with the Force, but he did something with the Force. And he learned that the Jedi had this Jedi devilry. They had the Force, and he thought, holy crap, I can't contend with this, with the existing technology that I have. I can't strategize around this just yet. And we see him learn from those mistakes, because when we finally get to Heir to the Empire, what's the very first thing he sets out to do? He goes out to find the Islamari, those creatures, right?
Right.
Whatever the heck they're. And he knows that he's got to surround himself with these things if he's going to confront Jedi, because he learned his lessons from Outbound Flight, which again speaks to some of those moments where he did make a mistake, or he was bested in a battle or nearly bested in a battle, but it was because he was not able to prepare for that. And in all fairness, he had never even been, he's been in the unknown regions this entire time. Coming across, this wasn't like he had a chance or an opportunity to study the Jedi culture. I think had he known that, he probably would have done so. So he was kind of going in blind and thinking this was just, a normal group of ships strapped to a bigger missile or rocket and, wouldn't have any problems. So he's definitely, I think they're very consistent in both regards there, both in canon and Legends.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to Legend. I mean, it's similar to canon as well, right? He's kind of sent on a mission in order to explore all of these people in the known regions of space, or I guess unknown from the Chiss respect at the very least.
Yeah.
Until he stumbles over Anakin, right? So, and then he learns about them. It's the way that kind of indoctrinating himself into what to expect with these, so he can go report back and continue those misadventures, if you want to call them that. So, I think in theme though, it was more or less the same type of idea, which I really like, that we were able to retain some of that consistency around what the objective was. I think, especially from the Chiss ascendancy, we could talk about whether he was exiled in quotes if we want, but I like that we were able to continue some of that. So not everything was lost when we rebooted the canon. We kind of reintroduced the character in, and getting that prequel type of look still exists.
Yeah. And so let's go kind of back in time. We'll kind of step through just some of the highlights, I guess, of his career, both in canon and Legends. And he follows pretty much kind of the same path for the most part. I think a lot of the same milestones are there that he kind of ticks off. But, growing up as a Chiss, which is a new race introduced in the Heir to the Empire series, this is the blue guys. One of the differences, he had solid red eyes in canon or Legends. And then when they introduced him into canon, he had actual eyeballs. Some of that was just artistically, they wanted to be able to show on screen where his focus was. And that makes total sense. But, a lot of folks had some problems with that. But he was, like you said earlier, he was a standout officer, rose to the ranks pretty quickly, a standout officer in both, and for the right reasons. I mean, everybody acknowledged in the Chiss Empire that he was a masterful tactician, all the things that we just said, but that was kind of outside the box of where they were. They didn't like the fact that he was the way he was, even though that's what made him very successul.
Well, he was politically inept in pretty much every way. All of the subtleties were lost on Thrawn.
Yes. And he was kind of, a character that would do whatever he needed to do, like go to no links or go to all links, I guess, to figure out what it was he needed to do to solve a problem. And at the heart of all of this was a character that was really trying to preserve his race, right? The Chiss race itself and their empire, if you will. He was trying to protect all of that. And so we'll get into that here in a little bit, I guess, with like Yuzhan Vong and the Grisk and some of the differences there. But yeah, definitely an outside the box kind of thinker in both canon and Legends. We talked about the Force already a little bit, about how in Legends, they really had no kind of knowledge of the Force. It wasn't until they came across Palpatine and Palpatine shared information about the Jedi. Palpatine used that against Thrawn to kind of encourage him, like, look, not only are this potential threat, which would become the Vong in Legends, allegedly, although Zahn has now said something else, I think. But yeah. So, but anyways, the Yuzhan Vong were potentially going to be the big threat, right? And so Palpatine was using that, as well as, hey, the Jedi are spooky, and they could be a real threat to your empire as well. So maybe you should go after them. And on top of it, that's kind of in Legends. In canon, we get a totally different take on this, which I think I like more, but I want your opinion on, and that is that the Chiss actually have Force-sensitive beings, and they've got different levels of power, right? And they kind of have their own unique take on what the abilities and how they label them, how they call them. But one of the cooler ones, and probably the one that made the most press and got the most notoriety is this idea that some of these Chiss that are force sensitive can get into these machines and kind of astro navigate through space. And they called these characters the Skywalkers. I like the idea. I know some people feel like it's kind of hokey and corny, or they're just trying to fit, fit Skywalker into another meaning when it really didn't have to. But what do you think about this whole Skywalker concept and maybe the differences that were introduced here between canon and Legends with the Force?
Yeah, I like the idea of it. And for those that maybe are less familiar, so these are basically the Chiss children, I believe specifically more female than male children, I think, are the ones that have these abilities. They can see, they can plot hyperspace lanes and paths and things like that with the ships. And so they basically hire them onto the ships and they help guide the ships through, to find everywhere they need to be. But over time, though, that ability fades, and then they usually become caretakers to those children as they grow older. And so to look at how, like, the Jedi have explained this, at least in some of the newer canons, is that if you don't use the Force, you lose the Force. And I think within that respect, they're probably only using it a very specific way. And as they get older, it's more difficult to draw on it and more without that training, without that formal training of at least. And it doesn't seem like they do any kind of formal training with these children to be able to cultivate this talent. I think they view it more as a talent and a gift than anything else.
Right.
And so it's not cultivated in any kind of way. So
yeah, like the Jedi, they don't take them and nurture them and help them grow exponentially in their power. It's just kind of hey, you've got a talent like speed reading. Right.
So they'll have some who are a bit more empathetic later on. Yeah, speed reading. A little more empathetic later on about what they're going through and how they do it. But there's no training. There's no there's no path for them to be able to improve this or to grow in it or anything like that. It eventually fades, and then they get to this existential crisis. But again, they're a tool, I think, within the Ascendancy. They don't equate it to the Force. They don't equate it to any kind of mystical energy or anything like that. They equate it to more of a talent or a gift that you were able to do. This is kind of what you were put on this planet for, type of thing, rather than you have something that's really completely, something completely unique that you can actually grow and do something more with.
Yeah. So, okay, so that's kind of where we are with the Force. Let's talk about the Yuuzhan Vong and the Grisk, and I am going to get into now. I'll get into a little bit of Outbound Flight and kind of the history there first in Legends. There's really not a lot to say from a canon perspective, but I want you to weigh in on something here that Timothy Zahn said here just this year, as a matter of fact, in March. But and you guys, again, keep me honest, because this is like old school memory.
I haven't read Outbound Flight in decades. So
it's been a while. Yeah, it's like 20 years or 25 years at this point. But okay, so long story short is the Jedi were wanting to make contact with beings outside in the unknown regions. For Palpatine, this was a threat. Like, he did not want, he had this is around the Clone Wars, right? So right before the Clone Wars, there was a master plan that he had of one day ruling the Empire. And his fear, although I don't know if it was ever said, and always in my own headcanon, I always thought he had a vision that the Yuuzhan Vong were going to come at some point, right? And so he was trying to preemptively do whatever he could to prevent that from happening. But if you think about where he was at the time of the Clone Wars, he had big plans. They were already in motion. And suddenly he's finding out that the Jedi want to send out this massive ship called Outbound Flight. And it's got a bunch of Jedi on there. It's a bunch of ships. I forget what kind of classes they are. They were all strapped to kind of a big rocket, and they were going to send them out into the unknown regions, make contact. And he was worried that if they came into contact with the Yuuzhan Vong would be a race that would want to dominate and obliterate everybody in his own galaxy. So they were going to screw up his plans, right? So this is self-preservation at its finest, yet again, from Palpatine. So what he decided to do was he eventually got to Thrawn, and I forget exactly how Thrawn even got into this. I don't even remember at this point. But at some point, he makes contact with Thrawn, convinces Thrawn that, look, you've got to stop this outbound flight, because not only is the Yuuzhan Vong going to be a threat to us, but it's going to be a threat to the Chiss Ascendancy or the Chiss Empire. And so Thrawn goes out there. They get into a battle. This is where Master Jarrah Sabayoth, who would later appear in the Heir to the Empire series, is first introduced. They have a war. Sabayoth almost kills Thrawn. They blow up the ships, and long story short is at that point, this is what gets Palpatine's attention. He realizes that, hey, I've got this really kind of masterful person. And Thrawn ends up going back to his group. He ends up coming back a little bit later, and they find him, that sort of thing. We won't get into all that here just right now. But what I wanted to bring up was something that Timothy Zahn had said this year, in that he was saying that in Outbound Flight, that it wasn't actually the Vong, that it was actually the Grisk. And I don't know if he's trying to like force this to be, canon at this point, that he'd always considered that. But someone was very quick to point out that the physical attributes as they were described in the Yuzong Vong don't align with the Grisk at all. And for anybody that doesn't know, the Grisk are, I guess, the real threat, the new threat. They're basically the Yuzong Vong, another type of alien race that's hell bent on galactic domination, if you will. Just a different take. I don't remember even if they have the Force sense of not being able to be impacted by the Force. I don't believe that's a component of them now.
It hasn't been explored yet.
Yeah, and still very relatively new, right? In all regards, with canon. But I guess your thoughts on the Outbound Flight stuff, and then why would he be saying, oh, it could have been the Grisk, and because I never really, because he's technically not wrong. They never really said it was the Vong that was a threat, but it just feels weird that he's trying to push that when we have clear evidence that that was never the intent.
Well, I think what Zahn might be saying is that in his mind, the arch enemy of the Chiss have always been the Grisk, right? That's always been the true enemy of the Chiss, not necessarily the true enemy of the Empire or of the galaxy as we know it, that the Vong invaded. So there's a lot of debate, and I think it's kind of fun debate, and there's no answer to it about what Palpatine was worried about, if it was the Vong, if it was the Chiss ascendancy, because they did have the expansionary fleet and all of that, or if it was the Grisks or whatever. It could have been just as much the Chiss as it could have been in the Grisks, right? Because the Chiss, while they do control their borders, they do expand and they do bring in other worlds, right? They are an aggressive force in many ways when they want to be, even though they prefer generally to protect their own, they do want to conquer as well. Nothing to the extent of the Grisk. So I think with Zahn's perspective, I think it was more along those lines of that was the intent, that he was wanting to take the Chiss aspect of all of that. I still think I think the Grisks are going to become a really good enemy. I think it would be interesting to see if they do spill over into our galaxy, or if they remain mostly in the unknown regions with Chiss and Thrawn and whoever else in those books. Because I think they are a pretty imposing threat. I think they do have the right mentality and they have the right amount of threat level that made the Vong so interesting. I think that was what was really great about the Yuzong Vong, is that they were a legitimate threat. They weren't a threat just to the Empire, the New Republic. They were a threat to the Jedi themselves, being outside of the Force, being robbed of the Force in some ways, or being penalized for the Force for their transgression. So it was a completely different angle that made them so villainous in some way, and then the ability to terraform and everything else. So the Grisks, we're still learning a lot about. There's still so many things we don't know, and whether or not they'll come and impact us in any kind of way. It almost seems like they won't impact the galaxy at large at all. Maybe there'll be a looming threat that the Chiss kind of take care of, but it doesn't seem within the canon that we know. And granted, there's a lot of little nooks and crannies we can go and explore these days.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't seem like they've really crossed paths yet. I think if you were looking for an opportunity for the Grisks and the Chiss to really come into our lives in Star Wars in a more overt way, you're looking at the post-Rey Skywalker era, right? Or the post-sequel trilogy era, in that era. So that's your new threat. That's not necessarily the Sith, but it's something from the unknown regions, and you bring them in that kind of way. I think is one way you could really do it if you really wanted to start bringing those cultures in and really start to expand the galaxy again to include those regions.
Yep. I want to go to the comments here. Alexandra chimed in on Thrawn. She said, Thrawn is so well-rounded. He is a formidable physical opponent and very cunning. I forget. Yeah, we kind of left out the physicality of him, because that was definitely very well trained. We saw it in live action, if you will, in the Rebels series. And, you and I had speculated, I think it was during, what was it on? It was the Ezra Bridger episode that we did. I think that might have been a Patreon only. But Patreon, either way, right? Yeah, we were kind of talking about, would we see somebody like Thrawn, use that more, wherever is he using a lot of that? Is he relying on that quite a bit, depending on where they are? And I don't remember how we even got there, but we definitely called it out.
Did Ezra pick up any on any of it either? Yeah, depending on what their situation is out there.
Yeah, right. Let's see. Music Train, didn't they kill Navigators when they got older? Steph responds, said, no, they definitely didn't kill them. They were given good lives. I don't remember them being killed. I vaguely remember that they would
revered,
lose.
yeah.
Well, I thought they were alluding to the fact that they would lose their force sensitivity over time too.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, as they got older, they would lose that ability, and they would be given other roles. But they would be esteemed, right? They would be looked at. I forgot what they call them, like the Navigators or whatever. But yeah, they would be looked at with esteem, right? And they would find a role, but the roles they were given were not always very. They didn't know what to do with it. They weren't guided into that new life after the navigation type of role. So it was, some of them deal with it better than others, and that was actually what the Ascendancy line did a really great job. That trilogy really did a great job of exploring with a former navigator, kind of tutoring a current one as well.
Yeah.
So definitely go read that. Go read those series. Of course, the new trilogy from Ascendancy was really, really good. Actually, it's my favorite of the 9 books John's written about Thrawn. That's probably my favorite trilogy so far.
In both canon and Legends, he does go through this exiled kind of phase. In Legends, he was exiled by the Chiss. They had kind of had enough, and they knew that he had already started this war.
They kind of had enough, and they kind of had enough in canon too.
Yeah. Well, they kicked him out. They literally kicked him out sent him off into, I don't know, basically an island of sorts. And eventually he, runs into the Empire, and then they arrest him, and then they take him back to Palpatine. Palpatine's like, holy crap, you're the dude that helped me. You're amazing. I want to make you one of my guys. And then he moves up to the ranks, right? And in canon, it's still similar. Like, I think he puts himself into exile in hopes that he would find Palpatine again so that he could get into their ranks, because he did feel like, hey, the Chiss, as they are, they're too structured, too rigid, and we need somebody that's, we need more chaos in our lives. And so somebody like Palpatine, I don't know if that's the right word or not, but somebody like Palpatine with that amount of power could be an ally. And so he kind of puts himself into exile, eventually finds his way into the Empire. And so it's almost a forced exile versus a mandate or a self-imposed exile in canon. But the one thing that was, I guess, consistent in both is he did have a hard time coming up through the ranks of the Empire, like we talked about. I mean, there's examples where, he was being framed for things. He was not treated the way everybody else is treated. A lot of the officers looked down upon him because, he is, again, the only one that we're at least aware of that was able to rise through the ranks and wasn't, was of an alien race. And, a lot of, at least in Legends, and I don't remember how they handled it in canon at this point, but in Legends, I know they didn't really tout his name a lot. He wasn't paraded around. It was like all these promotions were being done. Even the Grand Admiral, right? It's a huge rank, a huge honor, all kind of done in secrecy, all kind of done behind closed doors. So it was almost like Palpatine was, I wouldn't say he was necessarily embarrassed, but he just wasn't willing to give him that kind of that credit. I don't know that Thrawn even cared for it, to be honest, but it definitely didn't make his time at the Empire any easier as well.
Yeah, and maybe someone in the chat can help us out in the canon. If I don't know, we may not have explored his rise through the ranks of the Empire in any kind of detail. We get a lot of it in the Chiss Ascendancy, though, which I think to your point, though, probably mirrors one another pretty closely, because even in the Chiss Ascendancy, he was constantly being undercut, constantly being. Of course, they have a whole family structure and all the different ruling families, and you have the higher tiers and the lower tiers, and they kind of come in and out of who has true power. So that's a huge component of it too. And he was actually adopted by another family. I'm using family in really loose quotes here, but I mean, so there's a lot of things there too, of the political maneuvering, very similar to the Empire. So I think we got it from the Ascendancy side, but I think you could probably equate a lot of that to the Imperial, uprising through, or the Imperial Navy of his escalating through the ranks over there as well, because I think it was probably undercut at every corner, because we see it all the time already within just humans, right? So that Thrawn would experience that 2 or 3 times over seems pretty reasonable to me that he would be able to do it. But again, the way he did it over there and in the Ascendancy versus in the Empire, I'd imagine probably similar, right? It's results. It's just performance driven. I'm the one getting the results. I'm the one who, and make no mistake, like Thrawn does want the accolades that go with victory and success. He wants victory. That's very important to the Chiss, is to be able to hang your hat that you were victorious and that you were the one that brought it. There is a lot of self-gratification in that kind of way, and self, what's the word I'm looking for? But the reputation aspect of that really does go a long way, and it's very important to the person as well as their family type of structure, their hierarchies, if you will. just like they are in the Empire, although the Empire doesn't really have that latter aspect of it. Is very much more focus driven. But Thrawn aligning himself with the Empire, with the Emperor's motives and directives and everything else, is the only one you really need to appeal to. And Thrawn is smart enough to be able to avoid all the other pitfalls, potential assassination attempts, or whatever it might be that would drag him down into the same nonsense that a lot of the other Imperial officers seem to get dragged into in the Moffs and everything else, like the governing body and political nonsense. I think that's one of the nice things about Thrawn being almost ignorant and incapable of understanding a lot of it, is that he just can ignore it. And in the Empire, that thrives pretty well, especially in the Emperor's eyes specifically.
Yeah. Let's see. It's about him. Jane was talking about Thrawn, a Thrawn book it's about him and Eli Vanto. So, and we got to come. We're like way over on time at this point. And I've already skipped over a few things, and I'm gonna have to cut out a few things already. So I apologize in advance. But I do have a question about Eli Vanto, and that's probably not even how you say his name, because again, I've only read the books. I'm sure it's got a better, cooler name. But I do want to kind of come back to that, because I wonder if we would see him in the Ahsoka series. So let's move to the Ahsoka series now. And where the heck is Thrawn at?
Well, I like the idea that he's out in wild space. I mean, I think it's an area of the galaxy that we've not explored really in any kind of way. I don't know that we would need to get into that detail, but I think understanding where he is and where did Ezra or the Purgo really take them, and what is their day-to-day life been at a very high level. They don't need to dwell on this kind of stuff, but I think to give us a basis of where they went and what have they been doing for the last decade or whatever it's been would be really fantastic. So I really do think he's out of wild space somewhere. I don't think they've been moving around, but they probably land on a planet that will support life, of course. But I think what we talked about in the Ezra show, though, is he, there's a lot of Imperials out there. So is Thrawn the captive, or is it Ezra? And it kind of seems like maybe it would be Ezra, and I think that would probably be more interesting, while the rest of the Imperials are trying to, well, with the ones that didn't try to, stab Thrawn in the back, or they're all trying to find a way to get out of there, but their ships are in such disarray, there's not a lot of resources to be able to repair that.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Like, I do believe that he does have the advantage, if you will, over Ezra wherever they are, because there were a number. I mean, his entire fleet, including the Chimera, were all zipped away by the Purrgil. So they get there wherever there is, and I kind of see Ezra just kind of turning over and saying, "Okay, we're done. You got me. You take me. I'm your prisoner. I don't care what happens at this point, because we're so far away. You'll never get back. You are no longer a threat." He's neutralized Thrawn in a lot of ways. So I can see where Ezra is kind of, at least at the beginning, may have been the prisoner of Thrawn. I would like for him to have gotten escaped, and we kind of get them kind of in some kind of a scenario where they're fighting each other. And I say they, I don't even know who Ezra would have on his side. Maybe he's a hermit on the run, living in caves or wherever it is, and Thrawn is trying to not only find Ezra but amass some sort of an army and figure out a way to get back, because he's not going to be content wherever he is. So that has to be one of the motivators for him. He has to be trying to figure out a way to get back, knowing that there may be other people that are trying to find him as well.
Do you think there's any chance that he is orchestrating something in the back, that Thrawn actually has the resources, the communication abilities to actually orchestrate the Shadow Council and in a grander Imperial directive that we got hinted at in The Mandalorian with Moff Gideon, his dissatisfaction with it? There's clearly some secrecy, but do you think there's any chance that Thrawn is actually hands-on doing something, or at least from a communication standpoint, or is that a non-existent opportunity there?
I think he's probably amassing some kind of an army, or he's built some kind of an army. And I'm not saying it's huge, and I'm not talking about the Katana fleet, although we kind of were entertaining that here recently on an episode, talking about wouldn't that be cool if that zipped out of hyperspace and that became a huge threat or a cliffhanger at the end of this season, or leading into whatever the movie is, right? Some new version of the Katana fleet. That aside, has he been in contact? I mean, you can take that. So and I think what you're alluding to is in The Mandalorian, I think it's Paleon who says that Thrawn's return is imminent.
Right.
And so you're led to believe that either he knows something, or he's just kind of bluffing and trying to get Gideon to kind of fall in line with some of the other folks and bring people to his cause, or bring people to Thrawn's cause. I wouldn't put it past Thrawn to have figured out a way to communicate. I don't think it's a hologram kind of communication. Maybe it's some kind of basic Morse code kind of thing, or just some signal that Paleon and others, Thrawn sympathizers or people that were loyal to him, were able to pick up and get hope from, to know that he is out there, he's still alive, that life, that pulse is still out there. I can see where he's made contact in that regard, and maybe that's what, kind of bringing Morgan Elsbeth at this point. Maybe that she is privy to this as well, and she knows that's out there, and that's what's given her hope, and she's using whatever it is he's sending as kind of that starting point, that basic starting point for her to find Thrawn, whether it through, some kind of star maps that are long gone, as we've seen maybe in the trailers, or should they go down the route of the world between worlds? There's something there that's given him a starting point, and I don't think it's enough to say that it's just a Purrgil, because that could be anything, and we kind of talked about how that would work in another episode. I think it was the Ezra episode as well, but.
Yeah, and this is why I think it would be so amazing if Morgan Elsbeth did turn out to be a Night Sister in some kind of way, or something along those lines, to where you actually have a dark side Force user that gives you, again, it's the tip that you didn't have in Thrawn space previous to this, right? He didn't have a Force user at his disposal, or one that was working, pulling in the same direction as him. So it would be kind of a nice counter in order for that to come back into his space, and that's how they go find him. That's how he gets some advantage, even if it's a small one, based on whatever her actual abilities are or what they can do. But I think it'd be really cool not only to bring Night Sisters in, but also give Thrawn that additional resource that he's really never had. Rook was an amazing assassin and, combatant and loyal, companion, if you will, in some kind of way. A Force user is something else entirely, right? So I think that would be the one, you almost mitigate some of Ezra's ability there if you've got something on your side as well, even if it's just a different way of doing it.
Yep. We haven't seen Eli Vanto. Again, I want to just come back to that here because his name was brought up. For anybody that doesn't know, if memory serves, he was the translator. So when Thrawn came over, of course, he didn't speak Basic. Eli was able to speak Chiss, and so he became a translator, but then he also kind of became his right-hand man, and they kind of rose up to the ranks together. He's a pretty cool character. I actually liked him. I don't know that they would introduce him into this series, and if there's any room at this point. It feels like if there was, and he shows up later, I would have expected to maybe see him running around with Morgan Elsbeth. I don't remember his fate, or if they even gave us his fate at any point.
Well, we're so far removed from all of that now that it doesn't even matter, because that was all Clone Wars era type of stuff, if I recall right.
Yeah, it was a while back, because he was still with Vader.
It was Republic transitioning the Empire and all of that. So to me, it's, and again, I think, and Stephanie brought it up in the chat, I think the push more recently has been like Admiral Arlani, and some of the Chiss ascendancy are kind of the more interesting characters. So is it an opportunity to bring them in? I think within the context of the series, though, it's really tough to bring a whole lot more characters in than all the ones we already know, because I think it's so packed, unless you're just going to give someone a cameo name drop or a background character that we end up finding their names a little bit later on. I think that would be nice, but do they have any influence in the story? I think we have enough characters. I don't know if we need anything at the very least.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts about how he would return? I mean, well, I don't know if we want to entertain that, because I would imagine at some point, and we, again, just because of time.
Go listen to our World Between World episode.
Yeah, it's probably in the World Between Worlds episode if you want to know that. But I mean, we got to assume at some point he does come here. I think I landed in the World Between Worlds episode that he would appear here first, and that, Ezra and, finding Ezra and bringing Ezra back probably happens afterwards, because I think you brought it up. We kind of talked about how they've got to establish him. Yeah, it's enough to show him throughout the series and show that he's a threat wherever he's at. But when the rubber hits the road, he's got to be able to threat to the New Republic, because it's got to garner the attention of Ahsoka and maybe Luke Skywalker, the New Republic, throw in the Mandalorians, whoever you want to throw in there, right? All these folks have to really understand that he is a threat. So they've got to give him some runway to kind of establish that. So I would expect him to get back first before somebody like Ezra. Maybe they do come back at the same time. I don't think it matters one way or the other. But I guess one of the big burning questions here, I think that I'd want to at least try to solve before we're done here, is what does that threat look like? Like, why is he such a threat? Because I don't know, unless, again, you've read the books or you've seen Rebels, I don't know that they're going to have time to really make him a threat in this series, unless he comes back halfway through the season and he has, 2-3 episodes to kind of establish himself as that. But just in general, outside of what we've already discussed, why would he be such a threat to the Empire or to the New Republic or the galaxy at large?
Well, I mean, you have the New Republic. They don't want to fight. They want to decommission their fleets. They're vulnerable. But you need someone who can actually take your empire and put it back together and give you direction and give you authority and reestablish the chain of command, because right now they are just so fractured. Even within the Shadow Council, they still have differing opinions Where do we allocate resources? We're all strapped. How do we actually have a coordinated, focused plan that feels like we are actually going to retake the galaxy? That's what the Empire needs. The Empire's always thrived on structure. They need that structure. Who else better to give that to them than someone with the mind of Admiral Thrawn, right? So I think that's why he is so important, is because he can give and establish that direction and really commit the discipline that's needed from an entire, organization, if you will, the Imperial remnant, so to speak, and give them that discipline and expect that discipline from them and actually orchestrate the whole thing. I think Thrawn's about the only one that could do it outside the Emperor at this point.
Yeah. And I don't think he has such an easy road ahead of him, too. Like, I know Gideon's out of the picture at this point, but, there are people that were loyal to Gideon still, or kind of in that faction, right?
Oh,
they were splintered. So he's not going to be able to probably just come back in and everybody's just going to kind of fall in line. So he's got some contention there to deal with, some fractured relationships. Gideon being out of the picture, we don't even know what that could do. That could suddenly set off a number of these people on the Shadow Council to feel like, oh, okay, well, Thrawn's never coming back. Gideon's gone. This is my chance, my opportunity. They could be individual warlords now, all stepping up, trying to claim this title of heir to the Empire. Because, got to say that at least once in every episode. But, that said, I guess the point is he doesn't have an easy road. Now, he's going to have to establish himself pretty quickly. And I think whatever he does when he gets there has to be, because the Empire still, these remnants, they still have fleets. They still have soldiers out there. So how does he pull all those together? How does he get them in line?
Yeah, they want to win. I think is the one thing, right? They're motivated by success and by the doctrine. And if it can further their own gain, all the better, right? I mean, that's the idea. But again, I think they fear Thrawn. I think, make no mistake, like Thrawn uses fear as well. And we saw this in Rebels a number of times and throughout the books. But I mean, this is someone that will fall in line because they want to succeed. Even if they want to undercut him later on, they will ride the coattails of anybody that will get them to the destination they feel is their most opportunistic moment. This is why the Empire always fails, right? Because it just can't sustain this in the long term. This is the whole idea of what Bane was trying to do with the Sith Order, right? You can't have all of these Sith running around because all it does is it culls the strong and all you're left are the weak.
Yeah.
As weird as that sounds, it's actually fairly accurate, and so it's I think with that respect though, and that you need that healthy fear from who you're going to follow, but also they're willing to bide their time, and as long as they're basking in the riches and the glory that they want, then they'll be okay with that. I think they'll be more than happy to follow, but I think there's a certain healthy amount of fear for Thrawn across the Shadow Council pretty quickly. Once they actually demonstrate that he's alive and available and actually coming to the surface.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, like, how does the series leave? I think, yeah, you're right. You bring Thrawn in maybe about midway through that beginning of that second half of the season. And then at the very end, you just unleash Thrawn, and the New Republic now understands what they have been ignoring and what they've not wanted to acknowledge, that people like Hera and others have been saying the entire time. And now here it is at your doorstep, and something really bad has happened in season 1 of Ahsoka, kind of thing. So yeah. I really think that would be a really powerful way of ending this series, or this first season. However this is actually going to play out, it kind of seems like it's just a season at this point, but we'll see. I think with the movie, and someone made a comment here about the movie 80s Come from the Night. 80s Come from the Night. Yeah. Thrawn will be the main villain in the Filoni film. I mean, it seems to make sense, right? I mean, he's the bad dude at this point, and everything's kind of circling around this wagon.
Okay, so in the 1 minute and 18 seconds we've got left, if we do, let's fast forward past the Ahsoka series now, way into the future. We're talking about the movie, assuming that Thrawn is the big bad. He's amassed his forces. He's a real threat. We talked about Luke Skywalker. Maybe you can weave that into, like, who would oppose him? Who would stop him? Who could it be? And what's it going to take to stop somebody like Thrawn with the vast amount of knowledge, I guess? So any thoughts around who do you get to fight Thrawn at this point?
I mean, that's the idea, right? I think it takes the entire village to be able to do it. It took all of the rebels to be able to do it in some kind of way, right? They had to bring all of their resources, even the Hondos and the clones and things like that, in order to come and be successful. They had to do something. It wasn't just this small group of people. And so I like the idea that this is the ability for us to see Luke Skywalker do something with the Jedi. Again, this continues to be the bane of Thrawn's existence. So that they would play a part in that, at least some role in that, would be really exciting. And I think for a lot of people who were unhappy about maybe how Luke Skywalker's legacy has changed throughout the sequel trilogy, I think this is an opportunity to revisit that and redeem it in a sense, but not it be the entire story. And I think with this huge ensemble type of cast, you could do something like that. But unfortunately, what that probably also means is you have to probably sprinkle them in a little bit more here and there too, which kind of waters it down a little bit there. But I think that's one way you could do it. But again, you need everybody to be able to chip in. I would like to see the New Republic get their act together so they can be a stable body at some point, right? That's the idea, is that they can demonstrate that they can lead through this. They're doing okay in a lot of different ways. They get crapped on a lot, but they're doing okay-ish. But they're not perfect, and they're swinging the pendulum too hard in some areas. So they're actually being way more ineffective than that. But they do still have a fleet. They have capable pilots. They have capable people. But they've got to be able to trust them. Alphabet Squadrons, all of the ones that Carson, what's his name, Carson Teva, even Zeb is out there, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And I'm with you. Like, it feels like it's going to be, all roads, all these different series are going to have to come together. So I'm envisioning we're going to get an Ahsoka, of course. We'll get the Ghost crew as well, the New Republic, throw in the Mandalorians in there as well, as opposed maybe just to get back at the Empire, what's left of the Empire for what they've done to Mandalore.
Exactly.
They might be a little busy. You get somebody like Luke Skywalker, and I think a lot of people would be like, whoa, that's kind of game over if you've got Luke Skywalker in his prime. But let's not forget, he didn't do so well on Heir to the Empire. And I would love to see them pull aspects of Heir to the Empire where Thrawn, again, having now been exposed to the Jedi in a lot of different ways, having spent time with Ezra, at least knows that, okay, I've got to figure out a way to neutralize the Force. And he goes after something like the Ysalamari or some other kind of a creature that, I would love for them to introduce something like that from Legends into here as a way to kind of level the playing field. I think he obviously is going to fall, but like we said very early on, it's going to be because there was something that he could not plan for. And what that is, we don't have time to speculate. I wouldn't even want to speculate at this point, but that's the only way I can see them bringing down Thrawn, because he is just a different kind of character on another level than anything anybody has faced thus far in Star Wars.
Yeah, I think the thing with the Jedi is that there's still only a few of them, right? So it's not like they're all out there and they can do everything and they can be everywhere to thwart a potential threat this size, depending on how big it's gotten. So I think we have to keep that in respect too. We have to understand that and not get too overzealous about some of that, about their abilities, right? They can't be everywhere.
Right. You know who is everywhere?
Our amazing, amazing people in the live stream. Great job, Albert. Fantastic job. Thumbs up, my friend.
It's terrible, but please hurry.
Well, we just got to work on the handoff a little bit. Yeah. So Sky, Alexandra, Jack, Music Train, Steph, 80 Kids from the 90s, Keaton, Hard Counter, Charlie, Alex, Lego Cat 3000, everybody that's in the background. Thank you all so much for coming out. CantinaCast.com/YouTube. If you'd like to join us out here, if you were not subscribed and you liked what you saw, please do subscribe and like the channel. We really do appreciate it. We'd love it if you left us a comment. Let us know what you think. Let us know your thoughts on Thrawn. What are the things you're most excited about in the series? What are your favorite moments from the character? Should we bring things in from Legends into the new canon that maybe haven't been explored quite yet? So what are your thoughts there? What are we going to get with the risks? So on and so forth. We'd love to hear it. If you're curious about Patreon, CantinaCast.com/Patreon, that's where we're headed right after this. And we're going to wrap up our Ready for Ahsoka series with Zeb and Chopper. So kind of a fun episode, a little lighter hearted, maybe not as a deeper dive on some of these things as we've had with some of these characters, but it should be a lot of fun. So join us over there in just a few minutes, I guess. CantinaCast.com/Patreon.
Yep. All right. And don't forget about the AP5 episode too. That's tomorrow. Oh, look at this.
If you want to hear Albert sing.
No, look at this. Maybe Mara Jade. We haven't even talked about Mara Jade, but we will, because I still feel like she's coming. And
I'm so ready for an Emperor's Hand name drop, even if it's not an actual person's name, but
right.
Just say, give me the Emperor's Hand. I want to know that they exist. I want concrete evidence of it. Give it to me now.
Yeah,
I'm impatient.
Me too. Okay, let's talk Chopper and Zeb on the Patreon show. And for everybody else, man, we'll see you guys here on the Ahsoka show, or the Ahsoka breakdown, which is just in a few days. Looking forward to that. So we'll see you guys here very soon.
You can do it.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff. But I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what. So that's your disclaimer.